Hello, everyone. This is the Love and Money Podcast with Shakira, and today I'm going to talk to you about what is inflation. So, you may have noticed on the news that they're starting to talk about inflation. Is this something that we should be concerned about or not? Um, is this something that we should be worried about? That's what they're talking about in the news, inflation. So, I'm just going to define inflation for you briefly on this video. And so what inflation is it's when the prices continue to rise. So it's a steady rise in prices. And what the government does is they track inflation and they track it by percentages to see if it's within the percentage that they expect it to be in, or if it's starting to go up. Like if it is at 3%, for example, or 2.8%, or if it becomes outrageous like 8%, the government is tracking that and they've been tracking that on a regular basis. And their goal is to keep inflation low. So there are three different types of inflation. The first type we're going to talk about briefly is called cost push inflation. Cost push inflation is when there is an increase in prices as far as for businesses. And this is due to a limited supply of raw materials, a limited supply of oil, for example. Um, this is when prices start to rise for businesses. And some reasons for that, like I said, are limited raw materials, limited oil. Other reasons may be that workers, they want more money. They feel like they're not making enough money. They want raises. Um, Also, land rent. The land rent is going up because there are not enough buildings being built on that land. So that is what you call cost push inflation. The second example of inflation, the second definition of inflation is called demand inflation. And demand inflation is when too many people want the same thing. So there is an increase in demand. And so demand is increased by things such as lowering the taxes or lowering the interest rate. So, for example, when you would do something like lower the interest rate, people would look at that as an advantage. For example, the interest rates are lower. So maybe this is a good time for me to go out and buy a car because I can get that car for a lower interest rate. And so what happens in that event is that you are increasing the demand to buy cars. Hence, this is called demand inflation. So that's the second type of inflation. And then the third type of inflation is when the government is printing too much money. The printing of too much money causes a rise in government debt. It also can cause bigger loans to go out. More people are taking out loans. And so, what happens in this case is that the worth of notes begins to fall. And so, this increases it starts to push prices up. So, inflation, why are people concerned about inflation? Why is the government mainly concerned about inflation? So, when looking at inflation, they're looking at three different things. They're looking at the income, they're looking at prices, and they're looking at house prices. And the reason why inflation becomes a concern is because out of those three categories, they desire for those three categories to remain consistent. But what happens is with inflation, they're not consistent. Either the price is out of whack, either the income is out of whack, or the home prices are out of whack. And so what happens with inflation, the reason why There's a concern with inflation. Just to give you an example, on Monday, you may be able to buy a home, for example. But with inflation, with that same amount of money that you could buy a home, now you can only buy a motorcycle. So that's just an example of what happens when you let inflation get out of control. Hence, the goal is to keep inflation down. So, this is the Love and Money podcast with Shakira. If you like this podcast, please share it with one other person. And thank you for listening.